Nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to Cult Chat, the podcast where we talk about coercion, control, and all things cultish. I'm Dr. Caroline Ansley. I'm a medical doctor. As a child, I lived at the Centrepoint community, a notorious cult in New Zealand, and now I run a website that advocates for the former children of the community.
I'm Liz Gregory, and I run the Glory of Our Leavers Support Trust, and I'm privileged to walk alongside people after leaving this group as they embark on their new lives.
And I'm Lindy Jacob. I'm a former member of the Exclusive Brethren, and I'm part of the Olive Leaf Network, a new initiative in Aotearoa to support leavers of high-demand religious groups.
Come with us as we unpack the cult playbook. We'll be talking to experts and leavers of coercively controlling groups, and we will call for Kiwis to cult-proof their lives.
Come with us as we traverse the cultiverse.
A warning, this podcast contains references to subjects and discussions which may be difficult for some people to hear. Please take care of yourselves and your whānau when listening.
Hello and welcome to Cult Chat. Can you believe it? But this is our 50th episode. So I welcome Lindy and Kaz for episode 50 as we roll into 2025. What do you reckon of that, girls?
Excellent.
That's amazing. Happy 50th to us.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we're not going to waste time at the beginning of the year talking about ourselves and summer holidays or anything like that. We are going to head straight into an incredible interview that you've done with two very special guests, Lindy. And actually, it's going to form the basis of a 4-part mini-series on shunning. And at the end of listening to your chat with special guests, we're going to come back together and have a wee discussion about shunning. So make sure you're tuning on in right to the end. Let's go.
Well, hello, and a very warm welcome to you both. So for our viewers and listeners today, I'm so excited to be able to welcome and introduce to our show, Cult Chat, Dr. Windy Grendele and Dr. Savin Bapir-Tardy, who are dialing in all the way from the UK, and you're both together, sitting here together on the recording because you're in the same town. So it's fantastic to have you with us.
Thanks so much for having us here.
So
Thank you for having us.
It's wonderful to have you here. So it's your Friday night. I'm hoping that you've managed to, put down the week and have some dinner and have a drink, and you're here excited to have a conversation today all about shunning. So that is a big word with a lot of meaning attached to it that we'll unpack soon. But first, let's hear a little bit more about who you both are, because you're both people with extensive interest and research in this topic. So, Wendy, your kind of LinkedIn bio and that sort of thing says that you have a PhD in psychology, and that you've got a real interest in qualitative research, which you've done in areas like social psychology, and that you've got a particular focus on group dynamics, coercion and control in faith-based contexts, and of course in the area of shunning. And you've authored and co-authored several articles in these kinds of topics, and you continue to research the impact of coercive control in faith-based groups. Is that correct? Is there anything you want to add to that there?
No, it's everything is correct. So yes, I'm a social psychologist, and I'm fascinated by group dynamics, as you said, the coercive control, abuse, specifically in faith-based context. And yes, my research mainly focuses on coercive and controlling practices, such as mandated shunning. I started during my master, and then, it wasn't enough. So, I kept being active in research with a PhD, and now co-leading this new research with Savin.
Oh, that's amazing. Okay, and then I detect a bit of an accent for you. You're actually Italian, aren't you?
Yes, I'm Italian. Yes,
Oh,
moved here, to do my PhD. So, and then, yeah, I'm still here.
oh, that's amazing. Okay, well, thank you. It's so good to have you with us today, Wendy and Savin. So, a quick look at your bio tells me things that like that you are an experienced psychologist, that you've, had quite a lot of experience in the mental health care industry, but that also you're currently a senior lecturer in counselling psychology at the University of Roehampton. Is that right?
That's correct. I have an interest from a clinical perspective and a
Mm.
research as well.
What a powerful duo you both are with, yeah, the different backgrounds and the overlapping interest and thread that you've got. But that for you, Wendy, as a social psychologist and researcher, and working with you, Savin, about the bringing in the counselling psychology perspective. What a powerful duo that is to be researching a topic like mandated shunning and coercive control in faith-based contexts. It's amazing. So can you tell us a little bit about, you've already done some research projects individually and together. Let's talk about those. I'd love to hear a little bit about them. I mean, I've got a couple in front of me, but I'm sure there's others as well. Like one of your pieces that you've done, well, you've done a few just only in 2023, last year. One of them, you looked at whether shunning from the Jehovah's Witness community is legal. Do you want to give me, a brief reflection about that? That's a whole nother area of the overlap of legal implications for group dynamics.
Yes, the articles are based from or are based on the findings of my PhD, the research I conducted during my PhD. Regarding that specific article, we consider or we proposed the possibility of broaden the scope of the law to include instances of people shunned from gated or high control communities. And we argued that this kind of communities resemble the structure of a family. So the dynamics are similar to the dynamics that develop in a family. Also, we argue the fact that impact of shunning is severe and long-lasting. So considering the introduction of concept of coercive control as a part of the law, yeah, we consider or we suggested that there is a scope actually to broaden the law and include these instances.
I think the timing of that article is significant one to take into account because in the UK, the laws had changed not very long ago, and where coercive and control was recognized as it became part of the criminal act. Previously, domestic abuse, the concept that we all have is that somebody who's in a severe domestic abuse case, they will often have bruises, broken bones. But for many years, a lot of advocates and campaigners had campaigned for the recognition of psychological abuse, because that is what keeps an individual in an abusive relationship. The abusers use coercive and controlling tactics, so they have total power and control over their victims. And what it is interesting is that those same tactics are what is used on a bigger scale in high control groups. And yet that is not recognized to be a crime.
Yes, isn't that fascinating? Yeah, that is profoundly fascinating. And I mean, I guess in some ways I've put the horse before the cart here by asking about your research, when actually a really important thing to do is to kind of name and define what is meant when we use the word shunning, when you've used it in your research, when you talk about it, because here in New Zealand, it's still possibly not a hugely understood word by the general public, and it is often associated probably with the Jehovah's Witness community, because I understand that they use it formally, whereas to my opinion, there are a number of groups in New Zealand who use a form of shunning, but they call it different names. Some of them are religious-based groups, like, for example, the Exclusive Brethren, who practice, they call it excommunication. But there are other groups, even like, for example, gangs, who, there's a very strong insider-outsider boundary and a very strict process around social ostracism if somebody leaves them. So yeah, I'd love to hear you kind of, how do you define shunning, and why have you chosen to use that word in particular?
So it's, it's interesting, this aspect that you just, raised, because when I started my PhD, so I had two supervisors, and it was really difficult to find an agreement about the term to be used. It's when I came across an article written by Savin. And in that article, there was an email address, and I contacted her, realizing or finding out that she was working in the same university where I was studying. So, and that article was really about shunning. So I said, yes, this is the term. So after contacting her, she joined the research team, and she was my third supervisor. And one thing that she kept underlying was the fact that words matter. It is important to name things with their appropriate term. And sometimes we try to be, I don't know if politically correct is the right term here, but we are cautious in naming something or saying a word. But in this case, it's really important to give it the right name, and that's why we started using shunning and mandated shunning to underline enforced practice within certain communities. So when we say mandated shunning, so just to define it, is a socially enforced practice which is employed by a wide range of groups, not only faith-based communities, and it involves the deliberate marginalization or withdrawal of social interactions and communication with the individual who has been shunned from the community. And one interesting aspect of this practice is that some groups formalize this tactic through explicit directives.
Yeah.
However, often many groups don't have explicit norms or policies about shunning, but it's still perpetuated informally by the community. And this underlines the fact that this practice is ingrained in the group's cultural mindset and collective behavior.
Oh, that is so fascinating. Yeah, that's really helpful for me to hear that, because in my interaction with some groups, as you say, some have got it's formalized in doctrine or use of religious texts to justify it or whatever, and yet in some other groups that are maybe less outwardly organized, and in terms of they might not have an agreed upon covenant or set of beliefs, and yet their practices are just as real and just as strong as those who have got a book of doctrine or something. So that's really interesting to hear. But as you say, it makes it probably harder to identify, because I guess you can't look to their own texts to prove that this is something that the group does. You have to go by, I guess, qualitative research, do you, and hearing from the stories and experiences of people from that community.
Yes, definitely. So that's why that part of our research is, to understand the experiences of people who left these communities, these groups, and understand from their, perspective, the experience of shunning.
And I think something else that is important to highlight is the nuances of the words that are used, because there are different meanings.
Yeah.
And also each community might call it something different, whatever matches their narratives. So they will not say, we will shun you. They will call it different names, whatever fits in the narrative and the beliefs that is held as a group.
Yeah.
But what is similar across any group that practices this, because this practice is only done as a punishment to set an example to the other people, that if you disobey or you don't follow our rules, you're out.
Yeah.
And this idea of being out is ingrained in the belief. There is us and there is them.
Yeah.
So whatever terminology that they use, however it fits their own narrative, the practices, the tactics, and the consequences are the same, regardless of what group you come from.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. And, if you were to define some of those, to put it into really clear terms for any of our listeners who do not know what this looks like in practice, what does happen when somebody is shunned, to use that language? What does it mean?
It's not the language, but it's just the process that somebody goes when they are shunned from a group. And some people might call it exclusion. And I have seen sometimes some people mistaking it with family estrangement, which are completely different concepts. It's not the same thing, and it's not.
That's fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating, because I've noticed a couple of groups defending, saying that no, we don't shun, it's just normal family estrangement. That's kind of their little deflective tactic to try and place it back on just so-called family breakdown. But what you're talking about, something quite different, right? Which is where you've also used the term mandated to describe that it's actually the group and the group environment and beliefs and culture that is, I think you said the word socially enforcing this exclusion of a person. And so in practical terms, yeah, you also used the word punishment. You said it's only done as a form of punishment to put somebody out of a community because they're not following the rules. So I guess before shunning happens, is there usually a process there where a person is, not falls out of favor with the group for whatever reason, that there's some kind of, there is a relational rupture that happens there. So I guess that's nearly always a prerequisite before the shunning happens. Like something happens where the group believes the person needs to be punished. Is that right?
It depends. There could be different circumstances and different cases, but when people often realize that I don't follow those beliefs, they are not what I believe in, they don't match with my own internal belief system, I'm not doing the things that I would like to do, often that person will fear to speak out, or if they try to speak out, they will often be shut down. You don't understand, or you have to, in some religious pray harder, or in some communities, religious communities, to question anything, you might even be considered an apostate, which again, it's something wrong with you. So often the individual may stop from speaking out, or they may not speak out in the first place. So they are not then living a life that aligns with the life that they would like to live. And some terms that people have often used is like I was a closeted atheist, or it's other terms that have been used is being physically in, but mentally out. So it is a very complicated process, and something that in my therapeutic work I have found with some people is a certain age where they realize critical thinking. and to critically actually think, to find value in their beliefs. And because let's not forget, the coercive and controlling tactics, a part of it is questioning your own reality. So you cannot trust yourself. So you need to hear externally what is approved, and then that's what matters. So the person goes through a long process, and sometimes they might not make the decision themselves for living. They might lead a double life. So within the family and the community, they will behave as the way that is acceptable to the community. But then outside, whenever they get their freedom, they might, but it's always done with fear, because of the fear of being seen by somebody to be doing that. And in those communities, something I think that is very important to highlight is that there is a black and white thinking, and that is ingrained from a very young age. So things are right or wrong, black or white. And when an individual kind of internalize that belief system, so I'm either doing the right thing or I'm doing the wrong thing, which what it triggers is feelings of guilt when thinking that you're doing the wrong thing, and sometimes the feeling of shame. Now, shame and guilt are very great tools that are used in high controlling environment, because those two emotions are social, moral emotions. We learn them. So what might be, for example, considered shameful in New Zealand, it might not be shameful in the UK. And it's the same with those groups. So, and those emotions, guilt, we all as humans are gravitated towards alleviating the feeling of guilt. So if I speak out, then am I upset my family, or I'm doing something to harm somebody? So how do you alleviate that? By not speaking out.
Yeah.
So some people feel guilty for wanting to do some normal, it's their human right to behave in a way, but that is taken away from them.
Yes. I'm also really fascinated by, I think here in New Zealand, we've got a big Māori and Pacifica communities, and they are not individualistic usually in how they relate, the sense of community or tribe or group culture and group honor versus shame is very important. And so that's fascinating to me as well, to observe when I observe that versus more Western and often white individualistic kind of things, where it's like, well, who cares if that costs your family or they don't like it? You do you go and live your life and do whatever you want, regardless of the impact on your family or your community. And it's kind of tricky, isn't it? Because there's strength and beauty in both. Like, there can be really important things about finding your own voice and taking your own path, and at the same time, if it's always at a cost to everyone around you, that can be damaging as well. So it's like, as you say, it's complex territory to navigate well, and it can be abused or it can be weaponized. Like, both things can be weaponized, I suppose. Yeah.
This individualistic and collectivist kind of cultural differentiation, there are beauties in both of them.
Yes.
But what we're talking about is not the same, because if we think about it, in those high control groups, it's not just a matter of being collectivist and we do things together. It's a little bit more sinister in that you are the extension of them. So you don't exist you don't have a sense of an individual sense of self or belief. Your identity is the group.
Yeah.
The group's identity.
A word like enmeshed, is that helpful? That a person is just too enmeshed. They're not allowed to have any agency or choice outside of what the group determines for them. Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's really interesting. And I'm interested as well in your use of the term a gated community or a high control community. Do you use those words interchangeably? Like, obviously a gate refers to, I guess, a physical gate, or do you use it in the sense of a mental or psychological gate as well?
We use this term in a metaphorical way, so psychological gateness. because of the psychological boundaries that the individual or the community build to protect from what is considered dangerous or a bad influence. So it's a way to keep the distance from people who are not a part of the community. So it's more in the psychological way of understanding the term gated.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Wow. Okay, so that's been a really helpful discussion on what is meant by the use of the term shunning. And I mean, we could go on and on probably about that, about what that practically looks like. I know that a phrase I sometimes reach for when I'm trying to describe it to people is that a group often has, or in my experience with the brethren, that it's almost like they have to treat you as if you've died. Yeah, when I'm talking to someone who really has no idea what it means, because sometimes people just think, doesn't it just mean you leave your church? Like you just leave your church and like life carries on and you can still see your family, can't you? And that kind of thing. Whereas it's like, no, they're meant to treat me as if I've died. Like it's not just that I've like moved to another country or made some different life choices. It's like they shouldn't see me, they shouldn't eat with me, they shouldn't even write letters or phone call with me. They're going to take down photographs of me around the house because I've brought shame on the family. My memory has brought shame, so it's not to be honored anymore. Or I am like cut out of the family socially. Like it's another article I found somewhere, I think it was on Jehovah's Witness research, and it used the term a social death, which I found a very helpful term to describe it as well. Because it is quite hard to describe to people who don't understand what it means. And as you say, there's different levels of it as well. So some people might still be allowed phone calls with family, but if there's still that sense of deep shame and dishonor associated with you, even if you can have a phone call, there's still this like severe relational rupture, right? So it can be complex as to what it practically looks like. But are those, in terms of a practical outworking, are those the kinds of things that you have seen in your research as well? Things like what I've just described of not being allowed to visit or communicate with people anymore.
Yes, definitely. And actually, you use I think, a very important term, which is a social death. It's important to underline the fact that often these communities, high control communities, use isolation in two ways. So initially, members are isolated from non-members, and this includes also family, who are not a part of the community. And this is the aim, the official aim is to protect the group from, external influences, bad influences. So the community becomes the entire world of its members. Meaningful relationships are to be developed only within the community, and everything outside, interactions outside the community or with the people non-members are frowned upon. So this creates like a bubble. And then isolation is also used, as we said, as a punishment, shunning. So when a member starts questioning the belief system or commits what the community considers a sin, every relationship is, stops, communication stops. The individual loses everything, all the social connections within the community are stopped to exist. And outside there is a social void. So that's why it's so important that the term that you use, the social death, is a social death. There is a family members stop talking with the individual, friends stop talking with the individual. You know, if they met the person on the street, they just turn their head. And it's difficult from someone who is not a part of the community to understand what the person is going through.
Yeah.
Because as you said, you know, normal interactions, it's, yes, I mean.
And there is something that you said that I think is very important to underline. You said it's different, but and the families stop communication. They don't always stop that communication because they don't want to speak to their child. The reason also why is that if they speak to them, then they will in turn be shunned. So sometimes if you don't shun the member because they consider, as Windy said, they have violated some kind of roles or norms within that group, they themselves get shunned in turn. And the concept of honor is used in inverted commas in this context when we talk about honor-based, but there's nothing honorable. But it's just in different communities would be used differently. Different words will be used. Honor-based abuse, often they incite honor. They've done something dishonorable, and therefore they have to be cut out. If you speak to them, you are also dishonorable, because it means you agree with their practice. So this is one way of maintaining power and control over the group. And even in gang, again, it's honor. So yeah.
That is so fascinating. And yeah, I agree so much. And I think one of the things that people don't realize about the impact of the social death is this thing, the word you used, Wendy, about being in a bubble, and how you described how all your social interactions and relationships are inside the group, even though you might be living in suburbs and communities and towns of, you know, thousands of people. You're socially, it is, I sometimes call it a psychological commune, because yeah, there aren't the practical gates, but you know, they are in the mind. And that's why then shunning is so powerful, because yeah, like, you know, out here, when I say out here, you know, if someone was part of a mainstream church and even if they left that church, they would probably still have their work relationships, wider family relationships, their friends from high school, their tennis club that they were part of. Whereas often these high control groups, because all your social relationships are controlled, like for example, in the exclusive brethren, you can only be employed by other brethren. So your workplace is tied in with the brethren, and then because you only go to school with brethren, they have their private schools, you don't have, you know, connections with other, and then you're not allowed to socialize or eat with non-members. And so then it sets you up, right, for when you do get shunned, because you're kicked out of that bubble. Yeah, you have no relationships or networks, or particularly probably for women, I think, because often the women's world has been more narrow because the men have some more relationships through work. But yeah, it sort of sets you up, right, to make the shunning even more brutal than than what maybe some people outside who have got multiple social spheres, it's hard for them to understand what that's like. Yeah, you used the word social void, which I found really powerful, because that is what it's like. I sometimes say that for me, leaving the brethren felt like jumping out of a plane into a black hole. Like, you know, I knew nobody in the sense of having a long-term friendship or trust. You know, I'd made connections with some strangers who were taking me in, but even them, I didn't know them or trust them necessarily. It was absolutely terrifying to dive into that social void. So yeah, that's really helpful. And yeah, some of those practical things you've talked about there as well, like if people see you in the street from your group, you know, that they'll turn away. It's also things like we hear stories of people who have been cut out of wills, or like I talked about all your photographs around the house have been hidden or removed or destroyed. So it's got that very practical edge, even though it's psychological and relational. it has a very hard practical edge, doesn't it? That, yeah.
Yes, shunning is really a powerful tool. And again, at the beginning, Savin was, underlying the strong dichotomy um, um, in these groups, so black and white, good and evil. And, going back to the bubble metaphor, really, when you are in this kind of communities, although you can have maybe minor interaction with outsiders, you consider them like a danger, part of an evil world. So when the person is shunned, is find themselves in a threatening world, surrounded by evil people. So that's why sometimes people rejoin these groups because of the need for social interactions, because they lost all their social network. And again, this includes family, husband, wives, siblings, daughters, children.
Oh, it sets you up to fail in a way, and then that reinforces, the belief on the inside that safety is found with us, and if you leave, something bad will happen to you, which, life can be hard for those who are shunned, but it's not necessarily because the outside world is evil and awful. It's often because you've genuinely been set up to fail, because you've suddenly been stripped of things that are absolutely core to human well-being, your core family and social and friendship networks, and often your employment, your home, so many things, financial and education, employment impacts. So you are often set up to fail, and dealing with often kind of a complex PTSD as well as you try and navigate this new world. So it's as you say, that was an interesting line you said, that it is a very powerful tool. Shunning is a very powerful tool. It's not just some mere construct of the mind. It's very powerful with huge devastating impacts.
And I think there is something else that it's impactful, not in terms of punishment, how painful it will be on the individual. I think it's important to highlight that the whole point of why people are set up in such high control groups to not be able to survive outside the group. A lot of the social skills, everything is taken away so that they do return, because it's similar to what happens in abusive relationships. The idea is to tell that person, you are nothing without me. You can't survive without me. And in a high control group, it's more impactful because it is your families, the people that are supposed to be there to protect you, and they're the ones that are rejecting you. So if the ones who are supposed to protect you cannot, how can you do that with strangers outside that?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Oh man, it's just a perfect cocktail for setting people up to fail on so many levels, isn't it? Yeah, it's very distressing.
Yeah, sorry, and there is also the spiritual level. So, the community is blessed by God, and living the community means that you are no longer blessed. So it's, religion is again used, or religious beliefs are used to underline this concept of blame and shame and guilt.
Yeah.
So again, shunning becomes really a powerful tool to create this in-group versus out-group, and outside the group, there is only evil.
Yeah, that's so fascinating that then people's spirituality and religion is weaponized and used to prop this whole psychological construct up. And again, in my experience, they like to say, oh no, this is not just a psychological construct of control. This is doctrine, or this is in our sacred text, or this is from God. Whereas actually, really, it's, as you say, it's a social construct that they're then using God and religion and spirituality to try and endorse it and to add authority to it, because yeah, I mean, it's much more powerful if I say, if I say you're gonna fail if you leave and life's going to be hard, or something bad might happen to you, that's one thing. But if I also then say God will not be with you and you're going to go to hell and lose your salvation, then wow, that adds a huge amount of a huge another layer of control to the whole situation. Yeah. Well, thank you for that discussion there. Wow. Well, thank you so much for giving us such a comprehensive introduction and discussion to what mandated shunning is. And I invite our listeners to stay tuned for part 2, because we will continue this conversation. But over now to myself, Kaz, and Liz, and we will reflect back on what we've just heard Windy and Savin talk about. So thank you, Windy and Savin. We will see you shortly for part 2. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, Kaz, Liz, what did you think of that conversation?
Oh,
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a very a full, a deep dive into what shunning is. I mean, I'm new on this journey, as you know, because I've not actually experienced shunning myself, and nor have I followed someone go through the experience. So it was fabulous to hear some in-depth content about it. I think our audience will really appreciate the deep dive on this topic. So thanks, Lindy.
yeah, I was really taken aback just by the various descriptions of shunning, the social exclusion or withdrawal, talked about social death, social void. These are all really great words to talk about, but they made a point of saying that, shunning is not the same as family estrangement, because you can try and lighten it, but actually it's not. It's a very, very heavily loaded word with massive psychological impacts that go beyond just, I don't like my mum or my cousin or the lady across the road, and I'm going to not interact with her very much anymore. It's something deeper.
That's a really important point. And I've definitely come across some of these groups using the family estrangement idea as sort of a bit of almost like a PR line or a deflection line to just say, oh yeah, well, sometimes family estrangement happens and it's very sad when it happens, but there you go, these things happen, as if, like, look at us, there's no blood on our white gloves, as if there's, no connection at all to the social and coercive control of the group. So yeah, that was a really interesting point.
And often they'll do those PR exercises when they're under a bit of stress and pressure. Like I think the Jehovah Witnesses are sort of lightening up on their mandated shunning. Well, they won't be. There'll just be apparently a rule change written in the book, but it doesn't mean that the indoctrination has disappeared from the people who've been told that that's the right thing to do. Because remember, mandated shunning, you get in trouble if you don't do it.
Yeah, the punishment aspect. Yeah, that came through quite strongly. Like I was just thinking about what it's like to watch that happen and to know that therefore you can't speak out yourself. And I think in a family estrangement, relationships break down, but it's still possible for other family members to retain a relationship with the person, with the two members of the party. The children can still see the grandparents, and the siblings can still talk to the sibling, whoever it is that's fallen down in the relationship. But the relationship can persist with a broken the whole relationship, the whole family can persist with a broken relationship in the midst of it. But this is a real dividing of the line. And it's threatening. It's very threatening to future people.
Yeah, and what about Lindy? It was you that made mention of it being a social construct And in this context, they try to use God to endorse it and add authority to it. And so that's where the group's beliefs are tied to perhaps a religious ideology, and they're trying to give an excuse for it. But like other groups do shunning that aren't based in religion, and so it's clear that it's actually a power and control tactic.
Yeah.
I was thinking about how Windy talked about the way isolation is used, almost to set the community up so that shunning is as powerful as it is. You know, like the fact that all relationships on the outside are removed, so that, and she said that the aim is to protect the group from bad influences, but actually makes it so that the social punishment tool of shunning has its maximum power, obviously.
Yeah, it's like the perfect control tool, isn't it? Because it's got the positive spin on the inside. Oh, you know, this is for your safety and your protection, and it's got this profound effect of setting you up to fail when you are shunned, because it has such a negative psychological and physical impact that it does mean you enter the new world crippled, as it were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something I've really begun to ponder a lot of, and I think we'll talk more of it in our second episode, but it's just the incredibly damaging nature of the shunning. It really is the kicker, I think, for those who have left, and I think you're right, it is deliberately. They said, you know, you're set up to fail. They're set up so you return. And all I can think is, when you have behaved so badly to someone and been so rude and cruel as to shun them, do you really think people want to go running back to that? And yet they do, because that's the coercive control that goes on. People lose everything in their life. So they're just in a no-win situation. Having all love and social interaction withdrawn, it's just so cruel.
Well, I'm reminded of a story told to me by a friend who did experience shunning as a child, and she described how she lived for several years with a parent living out, basically in poverty, living out of a car, and talking about how her parent was so focused on doing everything that the parent could do to get back into the group, this desperation to be accepted again. And it went on for several years, this sort of a desperation. It's almost sort of pathetic is the word I want to say, but it's implies that the person is, but but they're not. They're desperate, absolutely desperate, because they've got absolutely nothing else. But that's how the group reduces you to that state of such complete dependency. There are no other options. And this parent really had been absolutely stripped of everything else and degraded as a person, such that was the status that she was in, desperately trying to repair this for 3 years. And it was a very effective punishment. It was effective.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, they use those feelings, guilt and shame and blame. You know, they're just... Lindy, shunning is something that you've experienced, and the group you've come from had a strict shunning philosophy. What name was it given? Because in the interview, they spoke about different groups can name it, and some explicitly and some implicitly. Some say, no, we don't do that, but actually they do practice it. Can you tell me a little bit about the context of shunning in the exclusive brethren?
Yeah, it's commonly called, I guess, by outsiders now with regard to the brethren as excommunication, which is the title of ex-brethren Craig Hoyle's book. But on the inside, traditionally, it's been called withdrawn from, which is a bit of a funny word, but it's actually from a scripture that says something, you know, in the New Testament, something like, it's talking about dealing with a wicked person in the assembly, and it says, from such a one withdraw, or something like that in the John Nelson Darby sort of archaic English Bible. So that's where they've got the word from, and it literally means to socially withdraw, to pull away from, retract, leave a person behind. So that's where they got that from.
And I think one of the comments was that, you know, your identity is in this group, and so to pull that from someone, it's like a massive thing to do. Like, it's not a small thing. And I recall when we were doing quite a bit of work with therapists and counsellors, that there's quite a lot of misunderstanding. They don't often recognise the depth of the pain created by the shunning, like how big a deal it is.
Yeah, that's really interesting because, again, I think sometimes people, they just don't have an understanding of these groups. And so I guess in their heads, they think it's just like, you know, leaving your tennis club or leaving your church or something. And they anticipate that, you know, 90 or 80% of the rest of your life and networks and identity and experiences are outside of that club or that church. Whereas, yeah, when it's a totalitarian sort of a group that you're like totally enmeshed with, yeah, it's just got this profound impact. Yeah.
And we'll be talking more about those impacts in part 2, won't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, we will. There was a comment that Savin made. She was talking about the whole point, she said, for being set up is to not survive on the outside. So they create that social context where you can't survive outside the group. And so therefore it forces the person to return once once they've left. And she said, you are nothing without me. And she compared it to the intimate partner situation where you actually kind of hear that narrative, actually, if you've been listening to women who've come out of, or even if you've watched movies, honestly, it's a script. But for a group to say that, you are nothing without me, and the betrayal of your loved ones, not the ones who are supposed to protect you, not protecting you. I mean, it's rejection, it's betrayal, it's isolation, it's abandonment, it's every worst fear of humanity, of an individual human. It's all of the worst things thrown together, and it's strategically designed.
Yeah, and then they call it Christian.
Yeah.
And love.
Well, it might not be Christian, it could be any kind of group, but yes, it is often justified through a spiritual worldview.
Yeah, that's a really powerful summary, Kaz, of what you just said about just how powerfully destructive shunning can be. And as we know, there are numerous people who are former members of groups and who have experienced shunning who have taken their lives. And that's one example, a stark picture of just how desperate they can get. And I have also encountered several others who have used the language of jail time and talked about how, you know, even serving life in jail would be nothing compared to the jail time that they feel they're psychologically serving already.
I think you've hit on a couple of big impacts there, and so that might be a good opportunity for us to wrap up this episode and invite everyone to come back for part 2, where we will look at the impacts of shunning, but you will first have a continuation of your conversation with Windy and Savin, looking into some more depth around this particular topic. So we want to thank all our listeners for listening in today to part 1 of a 4-part mini-series on shunning. Make sure you're listening in and sharing our clips, YouTube. We're on Spotify, Apple. Thanks, Plains FM, for the work they do in helping us get across the airwaves of New Zealand. Don't forget that we've got a new email address. So if you'd like to send some feedback or questions or some suggestions, then please do. Email info@cultchat.org.nz. You can get on our Facebook page and like us as well. All right, that's over and out for us, and join us for part 2 coming up soon. Bye, everyone.
Been listening.
Ka kite anō.
If anything in today's episode was difficult or upsetting for you and you would like to talk to somebody, we encourage our New Zealand listeners to free call or text 1737 for support from a trained counsellor. Or you might like to visit the resources section of the Olive Leaf Network website, where you can find a range of organisations and resources that might be able to support you. We would also like to remind you that the views and thoughts and opinions that have been expressed in this program are the speakers alone, and Cult Chat does not necessarily endorse or share them.